Are you ready to rock and thunder? And oh my god, is Enhancement Shaman ever a beautiful, beautiful spec? You're probably here because you love enhancement and maybe have been wondering, where is Enhancement Shaman in the meta in 8.2? Well, let's take a deep dive together into the talents, gear, essences, rotation, and more as we explore this beautiful beast of a spec and see exactly how good enhancement is doing in 8.2, because we all know enhancement needs a little bit more love from Blizzard as much as it's getting from us at the very least. It's that time of the video, folks. Consider enabling those notifications if you enjoy consistent World of Warcraft content, since YouTube actually loves you guys for doing so and will know that you actually love our content. So please do all the YouTube things you already know about. Thank you, love you. Actually, I feel I need to say this before diving in. There are 3 different Enhancement Shaman builds currently in the meta, and on paper the damage they do is very, very similar. Similarly enough, where you could go for any of the builds. In this video, we will focus on one, specifically the best performer of the 3 and the most popular. Isn't that a happy coincidence? Starting off with the first row, get Lightning Shield. Outside world content and PvP, you will add charges only with Storm Strike, and the build we'll be focusing on will have Storm Strike at center stage. Each talent on this row applies to one of the 3 builds I mentioned, by the way, so for the one we will be exploring, Lightning Shield is the best. On the second row, take Forceful Winds. The Storm Strike build synergizes well with Wind Fury, making this talent the best on the row. Not much to say otherwise. This is essentially a passive and requires 0 effort on your part to maintain, although the stackable buff is something you can pay mind to if you want to maximize your meters. Third row is one of the utility rows you will have. The default option and the one I would recommend you take is Spirit Wolf. Similar to the other 2 specs, this talent makes your Ghost Wolf into an actual defensive stance with a bonus sim ability as well. It will work wonders when you want to dodge stuff, get from point A to point B fast, or simply have a strong debuff on you which you want to mitigate as much as possible. The alternative is Static Charge, reducing the cooldown of your stun totem based on how many targets you have just stunned. This can be good in dungeons if you know you will be taking advantage of the reduced cooldown. If not, Spirit Wolf is still the best choice on the row. Fourth row is another building row. For your needs, you will take Hailstorm. This talent introduces Frostbrand into your rotation, which itself doesn't do much damage, but with the talent it will. More so, the Azerite trait you will be running will buff you with stats for each elemental damage you deal, and Frostbrand is our frost damage of choice to activate said buff, making this talent even better. Fifth row is a utility row, again with a couple of different options. The popular and most reliable choice is Natural Guardian. This acts as a mini cheat death where you get healed once you dip too low on HP every 45 seconds. This can be good in situations where you know your health will spike or the incoming damage is unavoidable. The alternative, and my personal favorite, is Feral Lunge. Damage it deals is very little, which is not what we're looking for, but the charge-like ability to quickly close the gap between your target and yourself is simply the best, better than all the rest. Pick whatever you like, although I would recommend Feral Lunge. Sixth row comes with Sundering as the only option to consider. The spell adds the most damage to your rotation at the expense of you needing to be positioned carefully. The radius of the spell is smaller than it would seem, so it can be easy to miss, especially in AoE scenarios. Try to think of it as a simple line and position yourself accordingly to hit as many targets as possible with it. Other than that, it has an incapacitate effect, meaning you can use it to interrupt targets, mostly out of cast, since any damage they take will break the CC. The last row comes with 2 options. Ascendance will give you a strong cooldown that starts a burst window, particularly good in single target. As such, this is good in raids and dungeons where boss damage is more important. Not to mention, for the duration, your main attacks will be ranged, giving you some flexibility when it comes to the encounter and the positioning it requires. The other option is Elemental Spirits, and my personal favorite and recommendation. This talent is overall smoother to use, especially if you're just pressing it when available. As opposed to Ascendant, this can be used very frequent, although both are competitive and accomplish different things. When you pop Feral Spirits, your 2 wolves can get one of 3 randomly chosen elemental affinities, buffing you in some way. The Fire affinity increases your fire damage and makes your Lava Lash hit harder. The Frost affinity makes your auto attacks deal extra damage, similar to Frostbrand, while the Lightning affinity increases your Storm Strike and Wind Fury damage. You can combine Sundering with the Fire Wolf for extra damage, but overall it won't affect your rotation so much that you need to alter and risk making mistakes. You can definitely practice it to optimize it as much as it allows you to, but don't lose too much sleep over it. I tried to make a habit of saying this, so you should remember it as well. The best gear you can equip based on stats and everything needs to be simmed on websites like raidbots.com, at least as long as we have the current gear and stat system. A general stat priority you can follow if you cannot be asked to sim is Haste at the top, followed by Mastery second, and on third spot Crit and Verse are pretty much equal. Agility takes the last spot. Although consider that going too much for secondary stats forsaking eye level will also forsake the amount of less ideal secondary stats as well. This ranking will become more and more true the better the gear you have, since if you're still getting those eye levels, agility will probably be better for you until you get the good raid gear. As an example, my stats are distributed like so, with Mastery and Agility at the bottom, yet Haste still number 1. Simming your stats only matters if you want to get good logs or simply want to deal that 1% extra DPS to put you high on the meters. With that in mind, make sure to select your gear appropriately, specifically rings and trinkets. When I say trinkets, I mostly refer to the stat buff trinkets, which have been the norm until recent patches where Blizz started pouring some creativity into their gear design once again. As such, if you want the best in slot trinkets, start with Ashvane's Razor Coral from the lady herself. This trinket is a critical strike factory, and I haven't seen a strength or agility DPS in the game to not want this, even if crit is not their best stat. You want to pair this with a cooldown whenever you proc the crit component. Next on the list is Dribbling Ink Pod from Orgazoa, a trinket which works in tandem with Ashvane's as well. Besides the agility, this trinket doesn't add to your damage. Instead, it has a chance to put a stacking debuff on the target as long as the target has more than 30% health. Once that reaches and goes below 30%, those stacks will pop, dealing damage based on the number of stacks accumulated. You can activate Ashvane just before this trinket does its thing to make sure the insane tick it deals will be a crit. You can also pair it with other versatility buffs, since it scales with that particular stat. As an example of how this trinket functions, take a look at this damage spread and see that the trinket proc, named Conductive Ink, has done more damage than Lava Lash on this fight, procced for over 560k damage and dealt a total of 4.6% of the total damage dished out, which is very good for any trinket proc in the game. Lastly, if you cannot get these, or if you are focused more on dungeons than raids, opt for any high level trinket that can give you one of your top stats. As an example, Harlan's Loaded Dice is another best in slot for most agility DPSers, and it's no different for enhancement. Moving on to the traits, this is where the build becomes complete. You want Natural Harmony as your main trait stacked at least 2 times. This trait gives you a stat buff based on the damage type you dish out. Remember when I talked about Hellstorm, the talent? This is the trait that makes frost damage a necessity, so you can get that sweet mastery buff. You ideally want to stack this 3 times, but to do that and have some of the next traits will be very unlikely or require a lot of luck to get the exact Azurite pieces to accommodate. Rolling Storm is the next trait you want. The damage it adds to Storm Strike is good and can be stacked if you don't have any of the options we will list in this section. What you really want is the guaranteed Stormbringer procs every 20 seconds, which smoothens the rotation, reducing the RNG crap that certain specs rely upon. Next up is Thunderon's Fury, which also boosts Storm Strike damage but by a much lower amount. You want this again because of its unstackable effect that increases your Wind Fury procs. This trait works even better with the Forceful Wind talent we discussed about earlier. After this, you can fill the rest of the slots with any generic stat traits or damage increasing traits. For secondary and tertiary traits, go with Overwhelming Power and Unstable Flames, both proccing haste and crits respectively, two of your strongest stats. As for the defensive, ideally you want Impassive Visage, since versatility is another stat you want to go for, more than other classes, making this particular trait strong. Lastly, for the essences, I will give you two builds to opt for. One for raiding and one for dungeons, expecting that you have these essences at least at rank 2, otherwise fill in with your strongest ones and see what is better. When raiding, go with Condensed Life Force in your major, Crucible of Flame in your minor slots, and Blood of the Enemy in the other minor slot. If you don't have Blood, you can replace it with Focusing Iris because really you want the passive haste most of all. For AoE and dungeons in general, you want Blood of the Enemy in your major this time, followed by Focusing Iris and Conflict and Strife in your minor slots. Focusing Iris again is there because of the haste, and Conflict and Strife provides a big boost to versatility, which is something you want in high mythic keys more than in raids because you tend to take more damage there. If you want to know more about the different builds Enhancement can opt for, check our stream on twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline. We sometimes play different specs and run dungeons and raids with you guys, so if that's your jam, come check us out. Or maybe you just want to watch some WoW. When you open on a boss, you want to start with Rockbiter, followed by Flame Tongue and Frost Brand. Once the buffs are up, pop Feral Spirits and Storm Strike once. After that, pop Ascendance and go into your normal priority. During your normal priority, the most important spell to have up is Flame Tongue for the buff. Use Feral Spirits on cooldown, keep Frostbrand up, pop Ascendance, and when you do, Wind Strike will be more important than any of the previous mentions. If Ascendance dropped, Storm Strike comes next as the most important spell. Sundering is lower down the list. Rockbiter even lower if you're below 70 Maelstrom and close to capping on charges. Reapply the Flame Tongue buff if it has less than 5 seconds remaining. Same thing with the Frostbrand buff. Lava Lash if you have more than 40 Maelstrom. Rockbiter to fill in, and Flame Tongue as the last filler on the list. To make it even simpler, the priority is to make sure you always have 2 buffs up and running, spam Storm Strikes while keeping any cooldown on cooldown, and that's about it. A bit rudimentary but gets the job done. As for AoE, it's pretty much the same as before, with the exception of Crash Lightning being at the very start of your every rotation while keeping it up. If you reach a point in your rotation where you need to cast fillers, cast more Crash Lightning since they also buff your Storm Strike. The rest is the same as the single target. After all of this, you might still be wondering, is Enhancement Shaman on the meters? Where is Enhancement in the meta? Well, it's right here actually. This is a log of the mythic rating performance of the DPS specs. As you can see, Enhancement is pretty high up there, and as a general note, most specs are performing decently on a mythic level. In accordance with the stat priority we discussed earlier, we will look at the consumables with haste in mind, and to be honest, haste will probably still be number 1, at least until they redo or revamp the spec for the remainder of the expansion. Pimp your rings with a cord of haste while popping some quick sand spinels in your socket to supplement your haste needs as much as possible, of course. Your 2 weapon enchants will be Force Multiplier and Quick Navigation. It seems that it doesn't matter that much on which weapon you have each enchantment, so as long as you have these 2 you should be good, but never stack the same one twice. The Agility Flask will be your obvious choice here, with Potion of Unbridled Fury for single target, and the Superior Agility Potion when cleaving or AoEing or general DPSing. For the food, you still want the Feast since the agility amount is still better, but you can replace it with Baked Potato when not raiding. Enhancement is doing a lot better than most people think, as well as other specs in 8.2 currently, which we probably already covered in our 8.2 class guides playlist, which you can check and maybe you find something that you like. Thanks a lot to our patrons for their support in making most of this happen. If you want to support our channel a little bit more and want to know what the details are, check below the video in the description. Thanks for watching the video and have a good one.